Each year, Yosemite National Park's beauty draws millions of tourists, even famous ones. In 1879, Civil War general and former President Ulysses Grant visited Inspiration Point and felt the view of the valley was the most beautiful he had seen in the world. Arriving by wagon in 1880, Rutherford Hayes became the first sitting president to marvel at Yosemite Falls. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and President Franklin Roosevelt visited on separate occasions. President John F. Kennedy visited the year before his assassination, turning down an offer to return to climb Half Dome. In 2016, President Obama's helicopter landed in a meadow, off limits to the public, to push his climate change agenda. It was President Theodore Roosevelt's three-day visit in 1903 with naturalist John Muir that led to sweeping federal protections of natural treasures. On this episode of History Hunters, Jeff and Sarah retrace Roosevelt's route and locate the wagon that carried him into Yosemite.
What are you doing?
I'm making broccoli soup
Sweet.
and experiencing a hurricane. What are you doing?
Yeah, I'm just sharing some of my my trivia.
Okay.
How many presidents do you think I've met?
Met.
Well, when I
as-
say
okay,
met,
well, yeah,
shake
come
their
on.
shake their hands, you know.
Was in their vicinity? Because you
No, like
you've
actually
you've been to an inauguration. Correct?
Either spoke to them or shook their hand.
Spoke or shook their hand. I would say 3 or 4.
Well, I have to stop and think about this. Well, Carter shook his hand, shook Reagan's hand and talked to him. And Bush, I talked to Bush. But I also talked to Teddy Roosevelt.
So that's 4.
You're supposed to say, how the heck did you talk to Teddy Roosevelt?
Oh, I was?
Yeah, I mean,
Why would I be surprised that you talked to... Why would I be surprised? This is you we're talking about.
How are you? Just bullying. Bully. You got it? He's bullying today. That's right.
See? So it is 4.
March 1903, noted conservationist John Muir receives an invitation from President Roosevelt, an admirer of the botanist and explorer, to join him on a Yosemite campout.
I do not want anyone with me but you. And I want to drop politics absolutely for 4 days and just be out in the open with you.
Muir seizes his chance to lobby Roosevelt for federal protection of Yosemite. Muir cancels a scheduled trip to the Orient, hoping to convince Roosevelt to remove the park from control of state commissioners, who've allowed the park to be overrun by commercial development and sheep, which he called hoofed locust. Roosevelt's 2-month Great Loop tour will take the president through 25 states, with stops at Yellowstone and the Grand Canyon. On April 1st, Roosevelt bids farewell to his family and heads west in an opulently furnished 6-car train. For many Americans, it is their first time seeing a president, as he delivers robust speeches in towns great and small. Roosevelt gives a total of 263 speeches, averaging 7 or 8 per day in his 5.5 weeks of public appearances. From April 8th to 24th, Roosevelt camps in the Yellowstone with naturalist John Muir, rides horses among the geysers, and dedicates one monument. An avid sportsman, Roosevelt resists the urge to hunt cougar for fear the optics will damage his conservation agenda heading into the 1904 election. In Wyoming, Roosevelt rides 65 miles on horseback from Laramie to Cheyenne with friends. Among them, legendary Deadwood, South Dakota lawman Seth Bullock. When the ride was at an end, reports the Wyoming Tribune newspaper, Roosevelt was the freshest of his party. On April 30th, Roosevelt dedicates the St. Louis Exposition in St. Louis. 6 days later, he's at the Grand Canyon before slipping through the Mojave Desert to Southern California. At Riverside's Mission Inn, the president plants a tree. Roosevelt addresses Pomona College, plants another tree in Claremont, visits a Pasadena school, parades around in Redlands, and speaks at Ventura's Plaza Park. The entourage moves north along the Pacific coastline, stopping at the Santa Barbara Mission and delivering an environmental address in San Luis Obispo. In Felton near Santa Cruz, Roosevelt marvels at giant redwoods but is aghast to find thousands of calling cards tacked to them and demands the defacement to end. Roosevelt reluctantly gives consent for a tree to be named in his honor but vetoes a sign. During his 3 days in the San Francisco Bay Area, the president delivers addresses in Burlingame and at Stanford University in Palo Alto before speaking at the dedication of the Dewey Monument in Union Square. Roosevelt was celebrated in a lengthy parade down Market Street and Van Ness Avenue, an event captured on film. Roosevelt also takes time to tour the San Francisco Mission. He also drops by the Presidio, where he reviews the troops, including Buffalo Soldiers, on the golf links. Accompanied by California Governor George Pardee on May 13th, Roosevelt feasts on oysters during a luncheon at the Cliff House overlooking the pounding Pacific surf. He expresses disappointment that his view of the Farallon Islands has been screened by the fog. On the return trip to the Palace Hotel, Roosevelt stops by Golden Gate Park to turn the first spade of dirt of the William McKinley Monument. That evening, Roosevelt rests in the same hotel which in 3 years will withstand the great 1906 earthquake but be destroyed by fire. On May 14th, the president helps lay the cornerstone of the YMCA Auxiliary Clubhouse in Vallejo, once located for a half a century on Santa Clara Street. Roosevelt then picks up an honorary degree and delivers the commencement address at UC Berkeley. Shortly after midnight on May 15th, the presidential train leaves Oakland for California's Central Valley. Roosevelt sleeps aboard the presidential car as it moves down the tracks through Alameda, Stanislaus, and Merced counties. As the sun rises, the train rolls through Chowchilla and Berenda. From there, the train labors into the foothills towards Raymond, the stopping point of the rail line. The president disembarks to board a wagon pulled by a team of horses over bone-jarring roads. Jeff and Sarah check out Raymond on a blistering hot 100-degree summer day.
This is where Roosevelt's train came to an end of the line and where he delivered remarks that he apparently didn't think he was going to deliver. The original Southern Pacific Railroad ties were left here in the ground where the line was abandoned in 1946. So it's possible that Roosevelt himself may have walked over these rails right here.
Word reaches the tiny foothill town that the president is on his way. The train arrives at the Raymond station and Roosevelt strolls to a nearby hotel, where a welcoming committee greets him to the strains of the local band. From the porch of the Bowen store, Roosevelt addresses a crowd of about 1,500.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I did not realize that I was to meet you today, still less to address an audience such as this, and I'd only come prepared to go into the Yosemite with John Muir. so I must ask you to excuse my costume. I have enjoyed so much seeing Southern California and San Francisco that I thought my trip would be incomplete if I did not get up into your beautiful country and then see Yosemite. Before I came on this trip, I was inclined to grumble because I found we were giving relatively 4 times as much time to California as to any other state. Now I feel that we did not give it half enough. It ought to have been 8 times instead of 4 times. I have enjoyed being here.
The presidential party boards 2 wagons and makes its way up the winding and dusty road to Ahwahnee, where horses are switched out while the tavern serves lunch. Driving the wagon is Bright Gillespie. Hours later, the presidential party tours the Mariposa Big Tree Grove, engaging in photo ops at the Grizzly Giant Tree. The wagon stops inside the Wawona Tunnel Tree to allow Roosevelt to strike a commanding pose. The president may have asked Governor Pardee about his interest in being his vice presidential running mate next year, an offer he will decline. Meanwhile, back at the Wawona Hotel, staff is busy making preparations for a president who will be a no-show. Roosevelt dismisses his party to the Wawona Hotel, where everyone believes he'll show up for dinner at 6. Instead, the president bypasses dinner and a hotel stay, so he and Muir can slip off quietly to pitch camp near the Grizzly Giant. With them are guides Charles Leidig, Archie Lenore, and Jack Alder.
The first night was clear, and we lay down in the darkening aisles of the great Sequoia Grove. The majestic trunks, beautiful in color and in symmetry, rose around us like pillars of a mightier cathedral than ever was conceived, even by the fervor of the Middle Ages. Hermit thrushes sang beautifully in the evening, and again, with the burst of wonderful music at dawn. We were in a snowstorm last night, and it was just what I wanted.
Early the next morning, the president and Muir tear down Lightning Trail to pass the hotel on the way to Sentinel Dome, where they forge through snowdrifts. Should the storm worsen, the president will be escorted to the Glacier Point Hotel 3 miles away. But tonight, Roosevelt will sleep on 40 Army blankets and wake up with 5 inches of snow atop his bed.
Just think of where I was last night. Up there, amid the pines and silver firs, in the Sierran solitude in a snowstorm. I passed one of the most pleasant nights in my life. It was so reviving to be so close to nature in this magnificent forest.
At 6:30 a.m. on Sunday, May 17th, Roosevelt and Muir ride to Glacier Point, 3,000 feet above the valley floor. Standing on an overhanging rock, they enjoy a commanding view of Half Dome, Yosemite Falls, Liberty Cap, and Nevada and Vernal Falls. After the photo op, Roosevelt and Muir ride down the dusty trail to Nevada Falls, where a crowd awaits him. A larger crowd is gathered at Happy Isles and follows him. Roosevelt is aggravated and grumbles.
I do not like to lead a procession.
By mid-afternoon, the president and Muir reach the Iron Bridge near the Sentinel Hotel. Roosevelt spoils plans of the welcoming committee to celebrate his presence with $400 worth of fireworks and a banquet. To avoid the crowd forming at the hotel, Roosevelt ducks into the art studio of Christian Jorgensen. This rarely seen photo shows Roosevelt and Muir approaching Jorgensen's studio as the president appears to be rubbing out some saddle soreness. The president dodges yet another Yosemite hotel stay to camp under the stars, this time in the meadow near Bridal Veil Falls. When thousands of gawkers follow, Roosevelt protests.
These people annoy me. Can you get rid of them?
On May 18th, Roosevelt and party board wagons for the Wawona Hotel and the return trip to Raymond. The 67-mile trip takes a record 10 hours. Roosevelt's train stops at Berenda for a short speech. Bound for Reno, the train heads north through the valley, stopping next in Merced for remarks. As evening falls, the train moves through Ceres and stops in Modesto for water to refill the locomotive. Few expect the president in Modesto, so only a small crowd awaits Roosevelt at Modesto's Southern Pacific Railroad depot. When the train arrives at 9:30 p.m., Roosevelt delivers another speech.
Friends, I know I was a good American before I came to the Golden West, but now I'm a better American than I ever was before. I have seen the wonders of the Yosemite. I have traveled the whole length of your beautiful San Joaquin Valley. I am proud of the fact that such indications of prosperity and things of beauty can be found in our country. And I know I'm a better American for having seen and enjoyed all the delights of your state.
So that evening, this building wasn't here. It was a different depot at the time, but President Roosevelt stopped here, as did President Kennedy, and he spoke to the people in Modesto from the back of the train. There was a citizen by the name of J.C. Alexander who decided he was going to shake the president's hand. He rushed the presidential train. The Secret Service pushed him back, and he was denied the opportunity.
While in Sacramento days later, Roosevelt drafts a sentimental letter to Muir, remembering the good times shared in their campout. Jeff and Sarah drive to Yosemite to check out Roosevelt's stops.
This is a typically crowded summer holiday in Yosemite.
President Roosevelt exited the valley on a now abandoned road above us here at Inspiration Point. The president took off with John Muir and two guides as he ditched the Secret Service. Keep in mind that 2 years prior, we had just had a president assassinated. The very reason that Theodore Roosevelt was president is because William McKinley was assassinated. President McKinley was at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo, New York, and there was a crowd of people that were standing in line waiting to shake his hand. This one guy walks up to him with a bandaged hand, and inside he had a revolver, and he reaches up to shake the president's hand with it. Nobody even thought about the fact that he was hiding a gun in it. He pulled the trigger and McKinley was shot. Theodore Roosevelt became president. They had to hunt him down and say, hey, guess what?
You're president now.
You're president now. He was the youngest president we have ever had. He was 42.
Summer tourists jam up Glacier Point's parking lot, forcing Jeff and Sarah to wait an hour for a shuttle bus.
Ordinarily, we could drive to Glacier Point. We can't because it's summertime, and the parking lot's too crowded, so they're going to stick us on a shuttle bus, and it could be an hour delay.
Trying to change it so nobody gets.
The bathroom that Theodore Roosevelt used. Just kidding. So, do you know that when I was visiting the Eisenhower home in Abilene, Kansas, I had to sit exactly where Eisenhower's pictured sitting. There's a rock up here that Roosevelt sat on. I wouldn't be a history hunter if I couldn't actually sit in the same spot Teddy Roosevelt planted his rear end. There you go. They're all standing on my rock over there. That rock right there behind me is the rock that Teddy Roosevelt sat on in 1903. It's a popular rock, apparently. Perfect. Perfect seat. When President Roosevelt arrived here that early May morning in 1903, there was a photographer waiting here for him. It's a good thing that he was photographed, because that picture represented a movement that was important to America at the time, and that was conservation.
You are brave.
Nice view that Teddy had. We're in the same spot. Probably not on the same spot. Hey, this is freaking me out. Get back.
Sarah fearlessly gets uncomfortably close to the edge for Jeff.
Ladies and gentlemen, she's violating the rules, I think.
I can stand up.
Yeah, you could take a flying leap into
right here.
you could take a flying leap into eternity too, but I wouldn't recommend it. Get back.
You want to stay here and I'll go over there and take a picture of you dangling off of that?
Not really.
Why is it? It makes you nervous?
Yes, very.
Why? Chicken.
Over the past century and farther back, daring thrill seekers have gone to great and dangerous lengths to be photographed on overhanging rock. For many years, there was a sign here that read, "It is 3,000 feet to the bottom and no undertaker to meet you. Take no chances. There is a difference between bravery and just plain ordinary foolishness."
Perfecto. No se muevan.
Crazy girlfriends just crossed this divider here to go pose on Glacier Point. You like being a rebel? Scared you, huh?
What?
Scared you, huh?
Scared me?
Yeah.
It's just very cold.
Henceforth, do not enter. The Glacier Point store may be a perfect place to buy a half-dome t-shirt or get food, but I couldn't help but think that John Muir would have objected. Perhaps he may have considered the 3.8 million visitors per year to Yosemite to be like the sheep and grazing horses he so despised. But if he were alive today, he may be pleased that the park looks so well, despite the millions of people who visit here every year from around the globe. That's one thing that
I don't want some more. I don't want to support
the president did not have up here when he came.
Yeah.
Haagen-Dazs.
We had to take a bus, but look what they had.
He took
up
a
there.
horse, but we got the ice cream.
We had a hot dog.
That's
earlier.
cool.
It's pretty good too.
Decades later, the wagon which transported Roosevelt on his Yosemite trip ended up in a barn near Modesto. Pierce Miller, a collector of antique vehicles, purchased the wagon for his California ranch between Empire and Waterford.
The ranch fell to ownership of Joe Miller, the grandson of May Miller and Pierce Miller, who owned the ranch. I have written to him, and I have also called his phone, and I have not heard anything back. So I'm going to take a drive out there and see if I can make some contact with him and find out if we can actually take a look at the wagon. Hey.
What's up?
I'm trying to find Joe Miller.
Yeah?
Is he available?
No, not right now. What's going on?
I'm putting together a program on Roosevelt's visit to Yosemite.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the wagon's here, because the Modesto Bee's reporting on it.
Right.
And so I was hoping just
Hey, well, I'm
going
going to give you his phone number. I'm going to give you his phone number.
Okay.
And that's all I can do.
Okay.
If he didn't call you back.
So what's the deal with Joe?
I don't want to get into that, man.
This is a real bummer because after months of waiting to hear back from Mr. Miller, I contacted him today and he has turned down a request to see the wagon for the show. It's kind of odd that he would let the Modesto Bee newspaper do a story a couple of years ago and photograph it. I do have the pictures of the wagon that show the seats ripped up. It's in pretty bad shape. I think a more fitting place for this wagon would be the Yosemite Village Museum. And I would hope that Mr. Miller would eventually find his way to donating that to somebody who really cares about history.
Because the California State Legislature will not allocate funds to improve Yosemite's roads and other infrastructure, pressure mounts to hand the park over to federal control. In 1905, lawmakers in Sacramento vote to relinquish control, a bill signed by Governor Pardee. Congress passes its own bill, which Roosevelt signs on June 11, 1906. Roosevelt's promise to Muir that Yosemite will revert back to the federal government is fulfilled. When San Francisco proposes to dam Yosemite's Hetch Hetchy Valley for water and power in 1908, Muir petitions the president to intervene. However, Roosevelt's administration stands by, leaving Muir gravely disappointed. The passage of the Raker Act in 1913 clears the way for the building of a dam and flooding the valley. Some suggest Muir died of a broken heart the following year. The Great Loop Tour had a profound impact on Roosevelt policy. He doubled the number of national parks and added the Grand Canyon to the list of his 18 national monuments. He also set aside 148 million acres to be protected as national forest lands. Roosevelt's trip to Yosemite was such an important historical milestone in American history that the U.S. Mint struck a coin commemorating the event in 2016.
Let's not forget that Roosevelt's conservation push led to his likeness being carved onto the face of Mount Rushmore, along with that of Washington, Jefferson, and Lincoln.
Did it work? I sat where a president sat.